So just to preface this as well, since I recorded the majority of this video on the 21st, 22nd, in fact, at GMT time it was the 22nd, so it was just a bit after 1 o'clock. So I recorded the entire video 20 minutes after the event of the US striking the Iran nuclear facilities. But of course a lot of things have been developing and occurring as this story meanders its way to its finish line, wherever that is prefigured to be by the scriptwriters. But as of, I believe it was yesterday night, I think it was midnight GMT of the 23rd, we have a sort of tentative, you could say untenable, ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire as well, brokered by the US, and Qatar, between Israel and Iran. And we know it's temporary because as of recording this 40 minutes ago, Israel's chief of staff stated, the campaign against Iran is not over. But he also added that focus will now return to Gaza. So Trump just attacked Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is to be closed. Motion within the Iranian parliament has just passed. It is simply waiting a ratification and passage by the supreme leader. And Yemen will now attack US and UK military assets in the Red Sea. Iran, most likely, will also attack US bases in the area. Considering the Fardo facility and of course the Esfahan and Natanz facilities too are all still active. They're still operational. It is only the access tunnels that were destroyed. But of course Iran, it knew this was coming around about June 18th or June 19th. They began moving all strategic materials to a far more secure location. The uranium is of course still fully under their control, and essentially the American bombs struck nothing. There was nothing there in the facilities. Along with the rest of their military arsenal, again that's still intact. Moreover, this may further galvanise Russia, China and Pakistan to provide more military armaments to Iran too. Moreover as well, this occurred in terms of American time. It was still, of course, Saturday. It was 21/6/2025. Now, what is the symbolism behind that? Well, 2 + 1 is 3, and then of course you have 6, and then 2 + 2 is 4, plus 5 is 9, 369. However, in terms of GMT time, as soon as, I think it was about midnight or maybe 1 o'clock, around about that time GMT, that these bombs were dropped. These bunker busters, the MOPs, massive ordnance penetration, I believe it's called. They're also known as MOABs, mother of all bombs. They're about 20.5 foot long, 30,000 pound bombs with about 17 to 18,000 pounds of explosive ordnance in them. Moreover as well, the US has also stated that it has fired 30 submarine-launched missiles at sites in Natanz and Isfahan as well, in the surrounding area. And they're actually stating between half a dozen and a dozen, or some are even stating more than a dozen of these bunker buster bombs were dropped on Fordo and Natanz. So, in terms of GMT time, it basically turned 22/6/2025. Now, recall too, yesterday morning was the summer solstice, GMT time. So, almost just a day later, after the sun has hit its peak, and it's on the decline. That's all ritualistic. We're going to go into that, by the way, why that is. You now have, with the onset of Cancer, which was known to the Babylonians as the gateway to the underworld, when We won't get into the Saturn-Moon matrix here, but essentially the idea is, with the 3 pillars that you usually find within Kabbalah and even Masonry as well, you have Boaz, Yakin, and then the centre pillar is the pillar of knowledge, known in Kabbalah as Da'at. That is the pillar of the union. This is known as the Zivug in Kabbalah. In Alchemy, it's known as the Eros Gamos or the Conjunctio, or Coincidentia Oppositorum. The idea is that the regulator of the mundane, hence the 30-day cycles of the moon, is that of the moon. So the Earth, in fact, according to the Esoteric understanding, would be more like a satellite of the moon. And then the moon itself is a satellite of the sun / Saturn. Saturn has a 30-year cycle. Of course, you can see the reflection there, 30-year, which is the grander world cycles, and then 30 days, which are, of course, the mundane cycles, which are encompassed by the moon. So, the 2 pillars are the exit and entranceway to and from this world. You see this within Buddhism and Hinduism as well, right? That is Cancer. If you draw a straight line from Cancer, which of course is under the sign of the moon, if you draw a straight line up the zodiacal wheel from Cancer, you'll get to Capricorn. Capricorn, of course, is under the sign of Saturn, the planetary genus of Saturn. Hence, we have our Saturn-Moon matrix, right? Cancer as well as its sign is the 6 and 9, right? So you have this interplay of forces, this Boaz and Yakin, this Putra and Factio, this order ab chaos, right? So it is duality itself, which has descended from a unitary point. Now, if you were to view this from a bird's eye view, it creates a triangle. Those 3 pillars create a triangle. That's the reason for, of course, the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States. It's the reason for the alchemical symbols of the triangle, the generative symbol. It is the reason that the triangle itself is found on the hexagram. Of course, there's 2 of them. By the way, that is also indicating the Saturn-Moon matrix. You have the open phallus, or the entranceways comprised of the 2 columns, and then you have the unitary phallus, which is the upward pointing triangle. That is, of course, Saturn. So you have the male and the female. Sophia and Yaldabaoth, or the Shekinah, the Nukva, and the Zeranpin, or the Shem Hamiforash, Yahweh essentially. Now, that's what comprises their worldview. But just to lay the foundation, that's what you're looking at here. By the way, it was seen on the World Ahead 2025, The Economist illustration. You see right at the top, you see Saturn. You see at the bottom, you see Jane Austen. The reason she is chosen, and the reason the female is at the bottom at least, is due to this idea of Sophia. Sophia is in slumber, the divine feminine is in slumber. It's entrapped in the glacial code of matter, and it must be awakened, and it must be reintegrated with, of course, the divine male, which is associated with Saturn. Now, what that ultimately means is the Eros Gamos. It's that same idea as the Conjunctio. It's the same idea as the Kabbalistic Zivug, which is that man himself must sublimate his soul by integrating the pride and its prejudice, hence Jane Austen, right? Its pride and its prejudice of the shadow. To integrate the pride and the shadow, John Milton in Paradise Lost also mentioned this same idea. So, to make the darkness visible, essentially. And it's only through the tree reaching its roots down into the chthonic darkness, the Platonic cave, the abyss, the Tiamat, right, which of course was associated in Sumeria with this divine feminine. The salt water, of course, as well, was also associated with the divine feminine. That only by that can man reach heaven, can a tree grow its branches to reach the uppermost threshold of heaven. Now, you see right in the middle, between the Saturnine archetype of Capricorn and the Cancerian planetary genus of the Moon, you see right in the middle the fulcrum between the two, which is Trump. Trump, he is the trump card. He is the agent of chaos, right? Hence what a trump card is. It's something that doesn't necessarily play by the standard rules, that comes out of nowhere, that breaks the mold, that revivifies the spirit. In this case, it was the spirit of Americana. Of course, that revivification will be completely short-lived. But nonetheless, that's what that means as well, right? Trump is, you could say, the initiator of this sort of axis, this birth canal from Cancer to Saturn. That's what you see on that Economist. That's the reason for it, entirely. So the onset of Cancer, that's the 22nd of June, 2025. The moon, the gateway into this world and the exit out. Hence this strike was the entrance into the new cycle. We are nearing Leo 2, hence Operation Rising Lion, and Israel's association with both Leo and the Lion. Moreover as well, I was going to get into this in the next video, but I must make mention of it right now because it's so very, very interesting. If you actually look at this connection between Israel and the Lion, it runs deeper than one would expect. So, Israel was declared on May the 14th, 1948, at 4 PM in Tel Aviv. The astrological chart cast for this exact moment has a Leo ascendant, or a rising sign, that's what it's called. The ascendant hence represents the nation's identity. That's why you had Operation Rising Lion. What is something we afford an entire month to? Pride. What do lions have? They have prides. They live within the pride. Just an interesting quinky-dink, I'm sure. But so the Karkinos, the crab, Cancer, the worst of all diseases for that reason. It is of both land and sea, a devolved and juvenile Capricornian sea goat, which is still to cross the threshold of the new cycle by immersing itself in the trials and tribulations of the journey through the underworld. The moon is the quintessential symbol of cycles. Its phases, new, crescent, full, waning, visibly dictate tides, influence growth, and are associated with natural rhythms, especially those related to fertility and time, the regulator of the mundane, the oracular mother of the matrix. June 22nd. The summer solstice, falling on June 20th or 21st, marks the absolute peak of solar power, of light, outward manifestation, and of vibrant life. It is a zenith, a moment of maximum illumination and growth. Crucially, the day after the solstice, June 22nd, signals the very beginning of the sun's subtle decline in the sky. The days then start to become shorter. Naturally, this fall of the sun relates to the USA, which the sun is emblematic of in its ritualistic sense. This transition from peak to subtle descent is a highly liminal and powerful moment of cyclical decay leading to renewal, alchemical putrefaction, or to make from decay. for life is excreto, as the occult maxim goes. From an esoteric view, it is not about the peak itself, but the initiation of a new cycle, often a descent or a reversal of the previous expansive energy, which is very much what we see in regards to the previous expansive energy of the prior Trump administration. In some ancient traditions, interestingly, the solstice period involved rites of sacrifice or acknowledged the turning of the wheel. Of course, we have this great war, so there you go, there's the rite of sacrifice and acknowledging the turning of the wheel, where the outward life-giving force begins its slow journey inward or towards transformation. Consequently, this deliberate act on the 22nd is a mere attempt to harness or reverse the energy of that said peak, thereby initiating a period of disillusion or disruption for the world, and specifically the USA and Western civilization itself. This timing also aligns with the very beginning of Cancer's broad astrological influence. Cancer is the first of the water signs and a cardinal sign at that, which means it is associated with initiation and action within the emotional realm. Its onset on June 21st or 22nd is a new astrological beginning. The moon's phases and its influence on tides emphasize cycles, ebb and flow, and deep, often unconscious rhythms. The crab's hard shell, which protects a soft interior, symbolizes a fierce protectiveness over one's vulnerabilities and home, and an introspective quality. This relates to immersing oneself in the abyss of the Platonic cave to seek enlightenment in the cavernous dark, descending into the underworld to find their soul, to marinate in the deathly abodes seeking the essence of life, which does not belong there. Moreover as well, a few years back, I did a breakdown. This was during the event of 2020, well in fact it was 2021, I believe, and I did a video on the Four Horsemen narrative, that blueprint, and I stated that these blueprints would occur, or pardon me, these phases of the various horsemen. You know, first famine, next war, we're in that now, and then after that would be economic collapse and famine, and then following on from that, death, which encompasses all of it. And by the way, the pale rider is not necessarily pale. It's the term used in the Greek is chloro, which means green. And of course, the reason for green is that it is associated with death, spiritual unripeness, and it's also associated with fecundity, the cycles, the green of this world, of this middle earth. Of course, the green is the middle colour of the visible light spectrum as well. The green itself is associated with Saturn, Poimandres, the green dragon. Where did the American Revolution begin? The Green Dragon Tavern, right? None of this is by accident. It's all ritualism. We've actually just seen that the White House has put down their blinds, and lo and behold, their blinds are actually a sort of pale green. I mean, what you're living in is a script, right? You're living this script. It's a simulacrum, a stage performance, a stagecraft of reality. And they're trolling you. I mean, there's no other word for it. They are laughing their asses off at the majority of people. The majority believe this is real. The audience are completely enthralled, engrossed, really, emotionally and otherwise, to this stage performance. They believe the characters are real. They rest their hopes and dreams in the characters. They live vicariously through the characters. The characters are them, they are the characters. They own the characters own them. One and the same. Without the characters, they are nothing. That is how they feel. So yes, the moon's phases and its influence on tides emphasise cycles, ebb and flows, and deep, often unconscious rhythms. The crab's hard shell, which protects a soft interior, symbolises a fierce protectiveness over one's vulnerabilities and home, and an introspective quality. This relates to immersing oneself in the abyss of the Platonic cave. Cancer is also associated with the family and home too. As stated, if the goal of those orchestrating these events were indeed ritualistic and designed to inflict deep systemic damage to the global stage and its narrative, the timing at the onset of Cancer, immediately after the solstice, would be symbolically potent. First, it targets the global and domestic home, and collective national and international security. Moreover, the dumping of the dollar, Operation Sandman, we'll get into more of that in other videos, is a direct assault on the global financial home and the foundation of economic security for many nations, primarily the USA. But this strike and the subsequent closing of the straits will lead to the same economic disruption and disillusion in the US of A. Naturally, this directly strikes at the moon Cancer essence of stability and comfort. Similarly, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, sending gas and food prices sky high, directly threatens the most fundamental aspects of home and family security, obviously. Access to sustenance and warmth. This is a direct strike on the Cancerian domain of basic needs and nurturing. Furthermore, Cancer is tied to national identity and physical borders, so escalating conflict, especially with attacks on US bases and countries that neighbour Iran, and attacks on Iran and Israel too, disrupts the very sense of national security and the inviolability of sovereign homes. Therefore, we see a symbolic tie-in with Cancer on these grounds as stated as well, which indicates a type of ritualistic script writing going on. Secondly, this timing is apt for unleashing emotional chaos and confoundment in the population. The combination of economic collapse and global conflict would unleash immense collective fear, anxiety, apathy, and insecurity. Primal Cancerian emotions. Therefore, this event may be timed here to precipitously amplify this emotional disarray on a global scale, pushing populations into a state of panic and vulnerability, or pushing nations into a rising tide of multi-theatre war. If foundational systems like economies and supply chains collapse, the collective sense of being quote-quote nurtured, as is a Cancerian domain, and secure by the larger societal structure has thus broken down, leading to widespread distress. Again, it strikes at the Cancerian axis of emotions and psychological archetypal states. Thirdly, it marks the initiation of descent, or regression, for the global unipolar order of the USA and the West. The day after the solstice, as the light begins to wane, may have been chosen to symbolise the beginning of a descent into the underworld, a sojourn that shall be fraught with darkening of the global order, or the human spirit, a dark winter, or a dark night of the soul. It is an energetic turning point where the dominant, expansive solar energy starts to recede, giving way to a more inward or even chaotic phase. And moreover as well, I believe this four horsemen narrative, that it really is three horsemen. I mean, the fourth is essentially just encompassing the other three. The other three will lead to the fourth. However, looking at it, we're actually seeing, again, I knew in that video that the next phase, because this is following the zodiac. Remember, the entire event of 2020 it started, give or take, 11 days prior. It was declared 11 days prior to the spring equinox, right? Of course, you had the event in 2001, which was also 11 days prior to the vernal equinox. The reason for that is, of course, it's the occult phase, or the occult range for ritualistic preparation. They require those 11 days for that. It can be upwards of 13 days, actually, funnily enough. However, what we're seeing with, of course, Aries and Libra, or the spring equinox and the vernal equinox, is largely both the east and the west. Those are the horizon points. You could say that they are the most important points, right? They are that which are visible to us, right? We can't really look up. The sun blinds us. And of course, we can't see the sun in its sojourn in the underworld, because it's below the ground and beyond our view. It's obfuscated. Hence, the underworld is chthonic, right? Unseen. So therefore, to us, the most important ritualistic parts of it are both the spring and vernal equinox, which is why we don't, but the script writers allot 11 days at least of preparation ritualistically for those days. So that's why we had 11 days prior to the spring equinox, and that's when the corona was sounded, right? The crown. The crowning of Saturn. Saturn is the principle of kingship. And now we have Mr. Golden Dawn himself, who speaks of the golden age of Saturn's America. And by the way, I've just released that book, so I'm going to do another video just announcing that, but you can get it on Lulu right now. So now we have the second phase past the pestilence phase of the spring equinox, the dawn. We now have the second horseman of war, the red horseman. Hence, Trump is a Republican, right? And of course, we saw Bibi recently wear a red tie, contrasting with Trump's blue tie. Very strange. Of course, relating to Boaz and Yakin, Bina and Hokmah. And moreover as well, severity and mercy. And of course, the second horseman is beginning in the next cardinal turn. It's beginning on the summer solstice, which I called that back in 2021, I believe. I think it was 2021, might have been 2022. That was with monkeypox. I thought it was going to be monkeypox that did it. It actually wasn't. It was clearly this. I thought that was going to set off some sort of geopolitical event due to the worsening economic situation. However, it didn't. We're now seeing that these are occurring within 5-year increments. So here's the prediction. 2030, the vernal equinox, which is the next cardinal rotation, will be round the zodiacal wheel, will sound, it will herald the economic collapse of the dollar. That will be the point where the dollar collapses, probably after this ensuance of war is sounded by Trump. Of course, Trump, the trumpeter of the apocalypse, the herald of Ragnarok, the Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, the war of the gods, the revivification of Yggdrasil, the world tree, which is being gnawed as we speak by the serpent Nihuk. And moreover as well, we will find after this, that will encompass the fourth horseman, which is death. That will prepare the world for the next phase, for the next age, that being, of course, the age of Aquarius. And you will have this constant cataclysmic transition as the world is turned upside down, is melted and formed and then remelted and reformed and hammered and tempered into shape within the crucible of history. You're going to see that come to the fore throughout, all the way up to 2030 essentially, and then afterwards as well. So it is an energetic turning point where the dominant, expansive solar energy starts to recede, giving way to a more inward or even chaotic phase if a global world order is forced to confront its vulnerabilities and retreat into a more protective or desperate state, like a crab into its shell, hypernationalism taking hold once more perhaps, or the multipolar world order of supranational superblocks coming into view. This could be seen as a forced collective regression, mirroring the Moon Cancer archetypes, more introverted and defensive qualities. The West is primed for destruction, but the West is but a branch of the system, as were all of the front empires previous to it. They are latching onto and galvanizing the growth of these branches, seeking to carry themselves upon the branch's trajectory of growth that edges ever closer towards the sun after each iterative branch. They are the hitchhikers of the galaxy, quite literally, hitching a ride through fiat currency and entrapping monetary shackles. Finally, there is a paradox of control through chaos at play. I mentioned a concept or description previously regarding the divine feminine, hence Cancer, the disjointedly feminine and tenebrous womb of the abyss. Needless to say, this perfectly captures a shadow aspect of the Moon, Cancer. While nurturing, the depths can also be chaotic, disorienting, and overwhelming, the literal heart of Maya, the illusion. Hence, to deliberately unleash this chaos is a clear esoteric attempt, no pun intended, to break down existing structures, the putrefied body, through a calculated plunge into the conflict of Negredo, blackening or disillusion, within the melting pot culture of the USA, melting pot. That was coined in 1912 by an interesting gentleman called Israel Zangwill, who was an admitted Kabbalist. Moreover as well, look at the Truman Show. We've also just had a supposed dome that just fell from the sky that looks like an eye in Indiana. Again, very much like the Truman Show, where Sirius falls from the sky. And moreover as well, within the Truman Show, the command center of that mundane world of Sea Haven, it is conducted, everything is conducted, planned, instituted from the moon, or the lunar command base. It's called the lunar command chambers, where you have Christoph, right, up there. It's the same idea. They literally put all of this, seed it all, throughout entertainment. As Manly P. Hall stated, quote, "Cloak the ritual in entertainment, and they will chant the incantation that blinds them," unquote. So continuing on, maintaining the war purely in the Middle East region, or by using airstrikes primarily to make calculated and precise strikes against targets that will generate the greatest shock and awe or potential for perception management and fear conditioning, suggests that certain rules or boundaries might be maintained within the chaos, perhaps to channel the energy in a specific direction or to avoid a completely uncontrolled explosion of cascade in a phrase, ensuring the system's self-preservation through calculated destruction and planned rebuilding. This is exactly the same idea behind steering the chaos of the Buffalo Run, for example, or of cybernetics, which derives from a Greek word kybernetikos, that means steersman. So in conclusion, the timing on June the 22nd, the astrological ingress of Cancer, is but another occult energetic marker for a ritualistic act designed to destabilise the global foundations of the current order, to unleash collective emotional chaos on a scale unimaginable, and initiate an unfathomably potent and potentially controlled descent into a new, darker phase of a global societal transformation.